Thank you, John. I really appreciate being able to join the St. Ignatius Parish community here again. It's, I missed not coming last year. Of course, we couldn't travel last year, so I was stuck in Washington, D.C. So it's nice to be back, and I want to thank everybody who's tuning in. Sorry we can't do it in person, but hopefully next year we'll be able to do it in person again. So my topic today is Joe Biden and Catholicism. This is a hot topic because there's been so much discussion, is he a good Catholic? Is he a bad Catholic? With lots of people with their opinions about that. And there's been a lot of discussion of this in the news, especially recently when the bishops had their own virtual meeting to discuss Joe Biden and Catholic politicians who are pro-choice and whether or not they can go to communion. So what I'm going to do is to look at Joe Biden's background growing up as Catholic, look at what kind of Catholic he is. I will argue that he's kind of a traditional Catholic, but also a social justice Catholic. And then I'll look at Joe Biden and his relationship with the U.S. Catholic bishops, and then finally Joe Biden and the Pope and the Vatican. So now you know where I'm going. First of all, growing up Catholic. For Joe, his Catholicism really came from his parents. His mother was a very devout Catholic, would take the kids to church every Sunday. His father was not so regular in his attendance in church, but both of them had influence on him growing up as Catholic. The church itself, growing up in there we go. Had to unmute myself. If you can't hear me, just let me know. In any case, so his growing up as a Catholic, I think, is very influential on him. Let me allow him to speak in his own words, describing how his Catholicism really had an impact on him and what it meant for him to grow up as a Catholic.
Hey, it's Danielle here at Four Patriots with some really great news. Our all-time best...
That was not supposed to do.
I was telling a story to Mike about my dad. And my dad would not have been viewed as practicing. He did not go to church every Sunday with us, to Mass with us. But my dad was retired, went back to work, and we were walking down the street in Philadelphia, and a beggar walked by. And I don't know why I said it. And he walked by me, and just being a why, I never did this before. And I said, as a friend of mine would say, I'm working this side of the street. My father didn't have any money. My father stopped, opened up his wallet. He had a total of $40 in his wallet. He takes it out, gives the guy $40. And he looked at me like, probably with your dad the same way. My dad never raised a hand to me, but when I got that look of I'm disappointed in you, it was like hit me with a baseball bat. And he said, Joey, just looking at Joey. And I said, but Daddy, he's just going to get it to go buy alcohol or something. He said, Joey, do you think he'd be on the street if he had a choice? What do you think? What do you think? It wasn't about you give to the poor and you you sell all your belongings and follow Jesus. It was just practical stuff, just practical things. Somebody needs help. My entire time that I lived with my parents, we had, with the exception of 2 years, a relative living full-time with us in a 3-bedroom house. That was just, there wasn't any, it wasn't. And by the way, it was wonderful for kids. For the kids, it was one. Well, not my parents did it, but it was just, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that translating my faith was never discussed or viewed in dogmatic or heroic terms. It was just part of the experience. And that's where I get back and where I began. Catholic social doctrine. We can put it in, the bishops say it very well in 7 or 10 points so they lay out, or I forget exactly how many. But it just gets down to basic things. Dignity, the poor, inclusiveness, reaching out. I mean, it's not that complicated. It's hard. It's not that complicated.
Final question.
Has anything changed in your thinking since your last public statements about whether you would see?
No, Father. And,
sorry.
I know from experience.
All right. Sorry about that. I have to learn how to do this. Okay. Am I back with you? Oh, good. Okay. That clip really shows the impact that his parents, especially his father, had on him growing up, and how he, that kind of Catholicism, of concern for other people, concerned about the dignity of other people, concerned about the people, the actual people around you, that was how his father and how he practices his Catholicism, and how little Joey learned about Catholicism in his religion and how he was supposed to live growing up that way. So I think that clip really shows it extremely well. Yeah, I would also argue that Biden is also a very traditional Catholic. He goes to Mass every Sunday. Even when he was over in England for a big international meeting, he showed up at this small local parish, and everybody was quite surprised to see him there. I think most of the other political officials were doing talk shows or sleeping in. But he always makes sure that whenever he's traveling, he always makes sure that there's somewhere that he can go to church on Sunday and go to Mass, and also on holy days of obligation. President Biden also all his life most of his life has carried a rosary in his pocket. This is something, that is a very traditional Catholic practice, a Catholic devotion that's dear to his heart. Catholicism has also been extremely important for him in dealing with crises in his life, especially the death of his first wife and son in an automobile accident. This was just a horrendous experience, and of him losing these people who were just so important in his life, and then suddenly becoming a single parent. These crises in his life have made him much closer to his faith, because his faith has helped him during these times. And finally, I'll just mention, when he won the presidential election, he quoted from the song that we sing at Mass, On Eagle's Wings. Bear me up on eagle's wings. I'm not going to sing. My brother's the singer in my family. But again, we see how, these things that come out of his faith have in fact influenced his life, influenced how he lives as a Christian. But he's also what I would call a social justice Catholic. He's very concerned about the poor, about how the economy impacts the poor. He's concerned about civil rights, the dignity of people, and the right of people to equality and opportunity, and the right to vote. All of these things that were so much a part of the civil rights movement. This was something that was important to him. And again, this is coming from his faith, his parents and his faith. And, global warming, as you know, this has been a really important issue for him as president, rejoining the Paris Accords, seeing all of these things as part of his faith. Again, I'm going to let him express this in his own words. So we can see how he, I'm afraid I'm not all that technically sophisticated. I think if I push escape, I get out of this. Come on. I apologize for this.
It's like,
no, oh, here we are. This is the one. Okay, now up here, and we go here.
Me, where I've never had any conflict, is the way I was raised and the social.
This glue will shock you.
Ugh. Sorry about the ads.
Watch how this brick is glued to the wall in seconds.
Social doctrine and religious theology I was taught were totally consistent. And it was summed up best as I thought about it. All the things that animated my passions, whether it was the civil rights movement or what's going on in Bosnia, were all about what my father would say. My father would say, my father wasn't an overly religious man. My mother was very religious. But my father would say, the cardinal sin of all sins, Joey, is the abuse of power. Whether it's a man raising his hand to a woman, whether it's economic power being invoked and asserted over someone else, whether it is the government abusing its power. And that's how I look at what this is all about. Why my faith is so consistent with the public policy. Look, I'm a practicing Catholic. I really do believe that I believe faith is a gift. It's not something you can. You can't learn to acquire it. It's a gift. And our church, I need not tell you, Father. It's you look at God in terms of the first obligation we'll have is love your God. The second one is love your neighbor as yourself. And then the way I kind of always thought about it, the way I was raised is, although I don't talk about Jesus Christ, but Jesus Christ was sort of the human embodiment of what God wanted us to do. And everything Jesus did was sort of consistent with what generically we were supposed to do. Treat people with dignity. Mary Magdalene, leper. I mean, everyone's entitled to dignity. Everybody. There's a basic tenet in my household. But when you look at it, it gets down to whether the Pope's encyclical, or whether it's talking about the poor, or whether it's talking about our obligations to others. It's all about fighting this notion of abusing power, no matter what form it is in, including the power of the church or institutions and I think that's why, I am so excited about this Pope. And it's not that I didn't have great respect and reverence for the last two popes. I got to meet them. I had 4 private meetings with Pope John Paul. But the thing that I think is so electric about the Holy Father is he's taking it all back to what my dad would say: we have an obligation to fight against the abuse of power. I find that totally, thoroughly consistent with everything a Democrat or a Republican. It's not. Can try to implement in terms of policy. Now, we'll disagree on a policy basis how best to deal with that abuse, where we think it exists or if it exists, but I don't think there's any fundamental disagreement that, we hold these truths self-evident, that all men are created equal. You could say it another way. The Pope says it. Every human being is entitled to be treated with dignity. So I find it
So once again, we hear Joe Biden in his own voice talking about how his faith is integrated from his father, from the social teachings of the church, from his own experience, from the encyclicals. All of this has had an impact on him and forms his views as what I would call social justice Catholic. And this is also integrated with, I think, his views as a Catholic Democrat. He's been someone who's always been seeing himself coming forth from the labor union movement. He, of course, was a young man when John Kennedy was president. He was involved with the civil rights movement. And I think today he's looked upon as being kind of a moderate Democrat within his party, but one that that brings his faith, his concern for social justice into the political sphere through his work. Then we need to get up to the current time and look at Joe Biden and the bishops. Recently, the bishops, many of the bishops have been emphasizing their disagreements with Joe Biden, especially over abortion and over gender issues and their views of religious freedom. It's clear that he and the bishops disagree about the issue of abortion. There are, however, all sorts of areas where the bishops and Joe Biden are in total agreement. Or in fact, you might argue that often the bishops are to the left of Joe Biden on issues like immigration. The bishops want to welcome everybody. They've also been pretty good in agreement on COVID. The bishops are supporting masking. When we go to church, the bishops ask us to wear our masks. The bishops have also been very supportive of the vaccination movement. Both are very much supportive of universal health care. The bishops want to give health care to everybody, including undocumented workers. They're to the left of Democrats on this issue. Aid to the poor, concern about the environment, a just wage, a living wage is the way the Catholic Church and the bishops talk about it, which is frankly much higher than even a $15 minimum wage. I think in terms of the concern for the poor, economy, foreign aid, these are things where the bishops are much closer. All of these are issues where the bishops are much closer to the Democrats than they are to the Republicans. Also, the bishops are opposed to capital punishment, and we're very pleased when the administration announced that they were no longer going to be using capital punishment. But clearly, abortion is the big issue. It's the elephant in the room. And the bishops feel that the threat of abortion is the preeminent priority. I put that in red because they emphasize that they said in their letter adopted by the bishops in 2019, that the threat of abortion is the preeminent priority of the bishops. At the same time, they have also said that as Catholics, we are not single issue voters. Candidates' positions on on a single issue is not sufficient to guarantee a voter's support. That's what they said in Faithful Citizenship. They said that it was wrong for a Catholic to vote for a politician because they were pro-choice or for abortion, but a Catholic could vote for someone who was pro-choice if they were voting for it for that person for other reasons. So the bishop's position is a bit complex and can be lost in the headlines. But they clearly say that abortion is a preeminent priority, but they also clearly say that as Catholics, we are not single issue voters. Joe Biden has made clear that he accepts the church's teaching on the morality of abortion, but he says that as a Catholic politician, he cannot impose this view, this teaching on others. So he cannot support making abortion illegal. Now, in the past, he was in favor of the Hyde Amendment, and the Hyde Amendment said that federal money could not be used to support or pay for abortions. He changed that, much to the disappointment of many people, and especially the bishops. He changed that position during the 2020 campaign for the presidential nomination. And he switched his position on the Hyde Amendment. And now he does support the use of federal funds to support abortions. And this has been a disappointment to pro-life Democrats and to many people, both in the Democratic Party, some in the Democratic Party and many outside the Democratic Party, especially the bishops. The issue of communion has come up in terms of whether or not Joe Biden can go to communion. Under canon law, whether or not someone can go to communion is up to the local bishop. The U.S. Bishops' Conference as a group has no authority to make this decision. They cannot make a decision that's binding on other bishops with regards to who can go to communion and who cannot go to communion. This is very clear in canon law. Before the Biden thing, just to give you a little historical background, the first time this issue arose was when Bishop Raymond Burke, who was at that time the Bishop of La Crosse, Wisconsin, denied communion to Representative Obey, who was a congressman from Wisconsin and in his diocese. And he sent him a letter in 2003, a private letter, telling him that he should not go to communion. I believe, if my recollection is correct, this letter became public because Wisconsin has a very liberal Freedom of Information Act and process. And so a newspaper got hold of the letter and then published it, and it became very public. When I was editor of America Magazine, I published an article by Archbishop Burke explaining his position on this. And I also published an article by a canon lawyer who disagreed with Archbishop Burke. And then we've also published an article by Representative Obey. And then, of course, in the 2004 election, this became a very public issue, because of the presidential candidate of John Kerry and the whole debate about whether or not he could go to communion. And so he had to be very careful when he was campaigning what church he went to and whether he could go to communion. Biden has been always allowed to go to communion by the Bishop of Delaware. So when he was a senator, when he was vice president, the Bishop of Delaware said that he could go to communion. And when he traveled, he had to be very careful about where he went to Mass to make sure he wasn't denied communion. And I believe it was South Carolina, at one church, the priest would not give him communion. So one of the job of his staff is to make sure that they can find him a church, because he wants to go to church on Sunday. Find him a church where he can go to Mass on Sunday. Now that he's president, of course, he's living in Washington, D.C., and there the Cardinal Archbishop Wilton Gregory has said that he can go to communion, has not denied him communion. The situation in Delaware has become a little more uncertain because there's a new bishop there, and the bishop has not publicly said one way or the other about this, and said that he wants to talk to Biden before he makes any decision. However, I think he's living in Washington, D.C., so that's the place where it really matters today. And he goes to Holy Trinity Church, which is a Jesuit church in Georgetown, where he receives communion. Now, the bishops have proposed writing a letter on the Eucharist. The origins of this letter were a number of bishops who felt that pro-choice politicians should not be allowed to go to communion. And so they asked the Archbishop of Los Angeles, who's the president of the Bishops' Conference, to put this on the agenda. And he agreed to put it on the agenda, so it became very public. However, once it was put on the agenda, there were other bishops that said, hey, wait a minute, what are we doing here? And were very much opposed to it. So you had bishops publicly arguing over this. For example, the Archbishop of San Francisco is in favor of denying communion to pro-choice politicians, been very public on this. However, the Bishop of San Diego, both of them in California, is saying, no, we should not be denying communion to politicians, to or pro-choice. So this debate has been going on for a long time. The Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago, Cardinal George, at one time, the late Cardinal George, at one time said that he did not want his priest playing cop at the communion rail. The current Archbishop, Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago, agrees and is against denying communion. So this is a very big and public dispute that is going on with among the bishops. And some of the bishops wanted to actually not have this letter. Now, the Vatican intervened on this by the head of the Congregation for Doctrine of the Faith sent a letter to the U.S. bishops saying that, they did not like this, to see the bishops publicly arguing. They said, slow down. They wanted them to develop a consensus on this before they had any action. So they wanted the bishops to have a much longer dialogue on this and to work for consensus. The Vatican has never, under any pope, has never liked seeing bishops argue in public. Their attitude is it's like parents. Parents shouldn't argue in front of the children. Bishops should not argue in front of the faithful, because it destroys that myth of the united magisterium. And so they're very much concerned about this. The Vatican is also concerned about this because if the US bishops had a policy denying communion to pro-choice politicians, well, then what does that say about the rest of the world? Most of Europe, you have pro-choice politicians. So if in the United States they can't go to communion, what's that say about Europe? And if President Biden is traveling and couldn't go to communion in the United States, but could go to communion in Europe, I mean, this is very confusing, and the Vatican doesn't like that kind of confusion. And we know for a fact that Pope John Paul II gave communion to pro-choice politicians. He gave communion to Tony Blair, who at the time was still Anglican, but Tony Blair has been a pro-choice politician in England. John Paul also gave communion to the mayor of Rome, who was publicly a pro-choice politician. So, in the Vatican, there's a lot of scratching of head and wondering what the bishops are up to in the United States, because what they're doing is not being done elsewhere in the world. So in June, the bishops met by virtual, by Zoom, and again here, the document came up. Now, when it was introduced by the chair of the doctrine committee, who's in charge of drafting this letter, he said, "Oh, no, this doesn't have anything to do with Catholic politicians and denying communion. We know very well that canon law says that this is up to the individual bishop. So that's not what what this letter is all about." Well, the debate, in fact, was all about that. I mean, the debate was all about that. So, frankly, if you watched the bishops' meeting, you came away very confused about what the hell this letter was about and what was going to happen. In point of fact, the bishops voted overwhelmingly to have this letter. What this letter will ultimately say, wait and see in November when they come in with a draft. I'm not going to try and predict what they are going to say. What about Joe Biden in the Vatican? The Vatican wants to work with the Biden administration. The Vatican wants to work with every US administration, Democrat or Republican, no matter what. They tried to work with the Trump administration, not very successfully, and they worked very well, frankly, with the Clinton administration. Because they were interested in dealing with issues of climate change, issues of the Middle East, issues of poverty and development, migration and refugees. These are issues that the Vatican wants to talk with US administrations about. And typically, they've been more on the same line with Democratic administrations on these issues than they have been with Republican administration. They had a lot of problems with the Trump administration, especially because of its unilateralism, its America First policy. The Vatican is a very strong supporter, has been for centuries, well, in the modern age, of multilateralism. This is the way they think international politics should be work. So they emphasize the agreement. So in 2020, for example, the vice president met with Pope Francis. And I'll give you a little bit of the description of that meeting that they had together in Biden's own words.
United States were at the very end, and so I walked up and there was a...
Hi, we're Lively. Hearing loss is frustrating, but getting your hearing back shouldn't be. That's why we created a breakthrough way to make hearing easier than ever. Lively.
There's a wonderful Irish Monsignor who had sat in with me in a long interview or discussion I had with Pope Benedict just several months earlier. And he said, "Oh, Mr. Vice President," he said, "Holy Father." And the Pope reached out like this and he grabbed my hand. He said, "I know, Mr. Vice President, you're always welcome here." That is the message he's sending to the world.
That is the tone he's striking everywhere, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's why he's the single most popular figure in the world today. And not just in Catholic nations, across the board. And it's because of he's the embodiment of Catholic social doctrine that I was raised with. Right. The idea that everyone's entitled to dignity, that the poor should be given special preference, that you have an obligation to reach out and be inclusive. That, I mean, look at the encyclical on climate change. It's all about, we have responsibilities. We have to husband this planet. I mean, and I'm excited, quite frankly, as a practicing Catholic. I am really excited by the whole world is getting to see what are the basic essential elements of what constitutes Catholicism. Right. We can argue about dogma, we can argue about some of the de fide doctrine that's been declared, but this is below it and above it. This is something much larger.
And he's going to address this.
Okay. So, as president, of course, as I mentioned, he has been really in tune with the Vatican terms of global warming. He rejoined the Paris Accords, which the Vatican was pushing for, multilateralism, et cetera. You heard in his own voice his feelings about these things. So this is an overall, overview of Joe Biden and his Catholicism, the attitude that he has, how his upbringing in his education led him to seeing social justice as an essential part of his faith. We've talked about the conflicts that he's had with the bishops, and yet also the areas of agreement that he has with the bishops. And finally, we see how he has also been in touch and with the Pope, and how he shares so much of where the Pope is coming from. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to our moderator, and who will tell you how to go about asking questions.
Great, thank you so much, Father Tom. That was an excellent and very informative presentation. I think everyone really appreciated what you had to say, and particularly about current events related to our president. So want to open it now to questions. I would ask that folks use your raise hand button, and I will call on you in the order that your hand goes up. And I see that our good friend Larry Simi has raised his hand, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Larry, please go ahead.
Thank you, Robert. Father Reese, fabulous presentation as always. The question I have is whether you wouldn't mind going through the theological underpinnings of the bishop's position that abortion is preeminent among, or is the worst of sins, or whatever it is they say.
Sure, thank you. I think, I'm not a spokesman for the bishop, so you should read. I mean, your Archbishop has a very good letter that he has published, and I'm sure it's on the website, so that if you want to be fully informed, I think that's the best place to go. But in brief, I would say that abortion is seen by the U.S. bishops as a preeminent issue because it's life. It's a life issue. And if you're not alive, you don't have any of the other rights as a human being. They would argue, for example, healthcare, a job, the environment, all those other things are irrelevant if you're not alive. So they see this as an extremely important issue because it involves life. And they would also say it involves innocent life. A child in the womb who has no control, is totally powerless and against the threat of abortion. Finally, they would also, I think, say that, you know, what we're talking about is millions of lives here that are under threat and in danger from abortion, and that is why it should be such an important and preeminent issue of concern. And again, I think, you know, if you go to the Archdiocese website, you can see the Archbishop's presentation on this, who can explain it much better than I.
Great, let's move on to Mary Rose LeBaron, and then Martha Keller will be up next.
Hi, thank you. So I'm wondering, what could any of us do? Because when you say it's a life issue, I would love to see, you know, climate change being joined with this preeminent priority. Since it's a life issue, abortion isn't the only thing, right, that's going to kill millions of innocent lives. And we're all sitting here.
Sorry, Mary Rose, you're cutting in and out. Sorry.
And that's okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I think I got most of your question, Mary Rose. I think what you're articulating is a position of many bishops and many Catholics, which is called the consistent ethic of life, which was articulated, of course, very well by Cardinal Bernardin, that we as Catholics should look at all of the life issues from the womb to the tomb and be concerned about that. I think you're absolutely right, and that should be a concern. And I think many, if not most, of the bishops would agree with that. But some of the bishops would say that, you know, some life issues are more important than other life issues. Again, this is something that bishops argue about, and somebody like me does not like to get in between elephants when they are fighting. But if you actually look at the documents of the bishops, you can see that there's some nuance even in them. For example, when it comes to voting for a pro-choice candidate, well, you know, suppose that candidate really is a strong supporter of doing something about climate change, strong supporter of migrants, strong supporter of a bunch of other issues that are very important to us as Catholics and as Americans, but he or she happens to be pro-choice. Can you vote for him? Well, the bishops say, yeah, you can, as long as you're voting for that person because of their positions on these other issues. If you are voting for them because they are pro-choice, then they have a serious problem with how you're voting. So for the bishops in their document, Faithful Citizenship, very much depends on your motivation as a voter. That is extremely important here.
Thank you so much. All right, we'll move on to Martha Keller and then Father Coleman after that.
Yes, I would like to know where I can voice my concerns and my complaints about the Archbishop here in San Francisco. I feel that he has his own agenda and that it's very exclusive rather than inclusive. I've tried to communicate with him to no avail. And so I went to, and I've been hearing different things in different churches that are not only confusing, but I'm just wondering if these two priests even talk to each other. Like I went to one church in the St. Thomas, and the priest there was so excited to have a Catholic president. I went to church yesterday at St. Monica, and the priest there was got into the homily, a statement about politicians who say they're Catholics, but they don't live that way. And I thought, oh, he must be talking about Attorney General Barr, who, paved the way for those, executions at the last minute. But I thought, no, I think he's talking about Biden. So, and that was very distressing to hear that during Mass and then have to think about that for the rest of the time. So I feel like the Archbishop is, going after Biden just very stridently. And, the next person is going to be Nancy Pelosi, I guess, because she's under his jurisdiction. And sooner or later is coming after people like me. And I want to know, is there anyone that I can talk, say, please make him stop, take him out of office? That would be fine with me. So. Yeah, what do I do? I mean, what do I do about my complaints when my own Archbishop will not talk to me?
Well, the only person who can directly deal with a bishop is the Pope. I mean, we're a very flat hierarchy. There's the Pope, the bishop, the priests, the people. I mean, that's the flattest hierarchy in the world. So, under canon law, for example, the Bishops' Conference has no jurisdiction over the local bishop. Other bishops can take a bishop aside and say, we think you ought to be doing X, Y, and Z, or you should not be doing A, B, C. We had this problem, of course, during the abuse crisis, because some bishops got it and very quickly removed people, bad priests from ministry. Other bishops were really stupid and did not. And no bishop could make another bishop do the right thing. And it was tragic consequences. And it wasn't until the Pope began intervening, and when the Bishops' Conference was allowed to set norms, which were approved by the Pope, that we were able to get this crisis under control. So if anyone has a complaint about their bishop, about all you can do is write the Pope, and of course he has a representative who lives in Washington, D.C., the nuncio. The nuncio is the Pope's representative to the United States, to the U.S. bishops and to the U.S. government. And you can always write the nuncio with whatever complaints you have about a local bishop. In theory, I mean, I might as well cover the whole spectrum. In theory, you could also write the No, you can't. He is the Archbishop. So yeah, that's it. That's pretty much it. Now, when I interviewed in the Vatican, one of the things I asked people, I asked them, do you get letters? And they said, oh yeah, we get letters from the United States. And they said that typically the letters were from conservative Catholics complaining about, now this was when I was doing my book on the Vatican, so this is a number of years ago. I haven't asked them that same question anymore to find out who's writing and who's complaining. Earlier, after Vatican II, it was more liberal Catholics who tended to write Rome complaining about their bishops. And then during the papacy of John Paul II, it tended to be conservative Catholics who were writing the Vatican with their complaints about bishops. Maybe if you are an example, or maybe the tide is once again turning, where we will have liberals writing the Vatican with complaints about their bishops. But that's about all you can do. besides pray, of course, we always pray for our local bishop at every Mass. I think, as Christians, we're called to love one another. We're called to treat people with respect, even people we disagree with. I think, as we all know, if somebody comes and yells at me and says you're an idiot, I'm not going to listen. I think we have to learn how to dialogue, how to have conversation, how to be polite in our disagreements. You should always begin by telling someone what you like about what they're doing. When I wrote my book, Archbishop, I was able to find something good to say about every archbishop in the country at that time. And I think, we need to do that, to thank our pastor, or thank our bishops, thank our priests, thank our family, thank our neighbors, and compliment them on the good things they're doing before we tell them what idiots they are and how they need to change. This is just human relations. But if you have a problem, you got to write the nuncio or the pope.
Very helpful. So before we move on to Father Coleman, I know probably a lot of folks have questions. I'm only seeing 1 or 2 hands up. So if folks are having a hard time using the raise hand function in Zoom, feel free to post your question in the chat and I will read it out for Father Reese. So Father Coleman.
Unmute yourself, John.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. So basically, one of the things about trying to say that abortion should always be illegal so that you wouldn't have Roe versus Wade that allows some is the double effect thing, because women will still get abortions, but they'll go to back row people where frequently not only is the baby killed, but also the woman. So there is a kind of a double effect there that increases death. Now, even if you're against abortion, you might be able to argue that you don't want that to happen. The second thing on Biden and coming to Catholic churches, I can remember when he was vice president, he came here to St. Ignatius, and I remember seeing him here. But our pastor has written him saying he's always welcome here at St. Ignatius, which is a way of saying if he's in San Francisco, he would receive communion here. So just so we know that.
Yeah, the whole question of the relationship between morality and law, John, you're much more an expert in it than I am, is very complicated. And if we go back to, for example, Thomas Aquinas, he made very clear in his writings that all moral rules and laws and teachings should not be made law. And one of the examples both he and Augustine used actually was prostitution. They were both against making prostitution against the law. And their basic argument was it's a law that's unenforceable, and it's going to happen. It's going to exist. And it's better to regulate it than it is to outlaw it. Now, this is amazing because, of course, we don't do that in the United States. Most countries in the world don't do that. And we would be shocked if somebody got up and proposed legalizing prostitution. But in fact, that was a view of Aquinas and Thomas and Augustine. And the rationale was that it was an unenforceable law. And unenforceable laws that people are going to disobey anyway, bring the entire legal system into disrepute. And they thought that was bad for the common good. So one argument pro-choice politicians could make would be that this is an unenforceable law. When you have such a high percentage of the country saying that abortion should be illegal, that abortion should be legal, then it's a law that, could not be enforced, and therefore we should not do it. In other words, the challenge then is you have to convince the American people about this before you can make it a law. And so far, that has not succeeded. The pro-life advocates have not succeeded. The data, the public opinion polls on abortion have been stable for decades and have not, they've just gone up and down in a very low range. Most Americans believe that we should not have abortion in the last trimester and have serious questions about it in the second trimester. But most Americans think that it should be legal in the first trimester. Now, the trouble is that the pro-life and pro-choice advocates they're absolutists on both sides, and see no area of compromise here. And so we're kind of stuck in the place that we are at. It's probably it's likely that the Supreme Court is going to move more and more gradually towards reversing Roe v. Wade. But of course, that is only going to leave it to the states. And of course, the state of California, it's going to be legal in the state of California. It's going to be legal in the state of New York. It's going to be legal where most Americans actually reside. And those places where it's not legal, people are going to get in their cars or on the bus and go over, or by that time, the chemical ways of doing abortion will be so readily available and effective that there will be non-surgical means of doing abortion. So I am not convinced that law is going to solve this problem. This is something that we have to have a conversion of people about. I think it's going to be have to be a cultural change. It's going to have to be a teaching change. And of course, as part of this whole discussion too is the role of birth control. If people don't get pregnant, they're not going to have abortions. So are there methods of birth control that are both acceptable and can be used, et cetera? And of course, this is a very controversial issue in the church today. Could people argue, for example, that birth control is a lesser of two evil, or that birth control is not a problem in certain circumstances? This is quite controversial in the Catholic Church today. It's not controversial with anybody else but the bishops, but it is certainly controversial. So, all of these kinds of things, come into play. Basically, if the facts tell you, if the data tells you, if the public opinion polls tell you that, abortion is not going to become illegal in most parts of the country, then you've got to have a second plan, a plan B, to deal with this. And, and that in some ways is the consistent ethic of life. Why do women have abortions? Most of them, when you ask them, say that it's because they have no health care. They've already got 2 kids and they can't afford. They don't have a job. There's no daycare if they want to work. So they're just overwhelmed by the thought of having another child. Well, if we have programs that help women, then they have a real choice. And if they want to have the child, they can have the child. They're not forced by their economic circumstances. So what is forcing women to have abortions is a question we also have to ask, because that's a way to reduce the number of abortions. If you can't get rid of them entirely, then you have to do all you can to reduce the number of abortions. And what's the best way of doing that? And I think there's a lot of programs that could be put into place that would help in reducing the number of abortions. It's interesting to note when you look at the data, the number of abortions has tended to go down more rapidly during Democratic or increase less during Democratic administrations than in Republican administrations, because Democratic programs tend to help women and the Republicans tend to cut those programs that help women. So then you get to the question, who is really the pro-life candidate? If that is the reality, if the Republicans cannot deliver making it illegal, except maybe they will, maybe they finally will through the Supreme Court, at least on the on the federal level. But again, that leaves it to the states. So all of this creates a very complex moral and ethical and political issue that voters and politicians have to deal with.
So we are just at time, but I do want to make a point of calling on, as we're discussing the issue of abortion, our chat box has made a fair point that it's been mostly men kind of conversing around this topic. So I want to call on Laurel McCoy, who I think wanted to share some thoughts on this. So Laurel, you're on.
Thank you. A couple of questions and a couple of points. I'm the one that made the comment that mostly this is a conversation by men between men. And I feel that if you are going to talk about abortion, women really need to come to the table and be part of this discussion. 32 years ago, I gave birth as a single parent. And I looked for support within the St. Ignatius, it was then not a parish, and found none. When I went to a pro-life office, looking for support, knowing that I was going to bring my child to term, at the end of the conversation with a woman that had children on her own, she said, well, I guess I don't need to show you pictures of dissected fetuses. That was the conversation. So there are larger political implications here, and social and spiritual implications. But so I would encourage you to have that conversation and include women at the table. The second is, I heard that the original conference, that Bishops' Conference that talked about this question of abortion was convened in part to talk about why youth are leaving the church or not staying with the church. And can you speak to that? Is that true, or is that a misperception on my part? And I ask these questions and I make these comments very respectfully. I very much appreciate St. Ignatius Parish in general, and Father Greg's leadership and all the community of St. Ignatius.
Thank you, Laurel. Thanks for those comments and the question. My recollection is that, when the bishops meet for their annual meeting, either in November and also in the spring, there's usually a number of topics on the agenda, not just one topic on the agenda. So, they could be talking about, young people leaving the church at the same time they're talking about their pro-life activities, et cetera. So it could be just a coincidental mix of things. It's absolutely true that large numbers of young Catholics are simply leaving, and most of them are doing this in their teens. And, we used to think they'd come back when they got married and had kids. Doesn't seem to be happening. The people who are what we call unchurched or nuns, N-O-N-E-S, people who say they're, when asked, what religion are you in? None. Those are now the largest religious group in the United States. They're larger than the number of Catholics. They're larger than the number of Baptists. So this is a growing phenomena. You'd have to ask better sociologists than myself, people like John Coleman and others, why are they leaving? And of course, you got to ask them. You got to ask young people. But a lot of it is, the concern about the political involvement. I mean, Baptists are also suffering this. Political involvement of the religious leaders in the church, religious leaders in politics. I mean, kids growing up today know, have gay friends. Think this is no issue. And they see institutions that are homophobic and become very upset by it, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of issues that are going on that young people are just getting turned off. We don't know how to reach out. I mean, frankly, we don't know how to reach out to young people today. We're still very old-fashioned in our way. We need to do more experimentation, take more risks in reaching out to young people in the church. So this is a huge issue, but it's not just for Catholics, it's also for other religions too. The tragedy of it all is when you talk to young people, they're thirsting for spirituality, and they're thirsting for community, and that's what we're supposed to provide. That's what religion, what the Christian community is supposed to be about. We're a community of disciples. We're friends in the Lord. But so often when we come to church, we're just sitting there by ourselves as observers and not participants. We don't know how, we've lost our sense of community. We've lost our sense that we're brothers and sisters in the Lord. And we've lost our sense of spirituality. And we have to regain that somehow. And for young people to be able to get back in touch with it. And now I know from some research I've seen that about half the Catholics who leave the church, about half of them become Protestant and about half of them become unchurched. And those who become Protestant, 2/3 of them become evangelical. And when you ask them why, it's kind of, they found the Bible in the evangelical church, which I find just so depressing, because we have some of the best biblical scholarship in the world, but they don't seem to be getting it in their parishes. We don't, the evangelicals, they're always reading their Bible. They're always open it. They have Bible sharing groups and stuff. Maybe we need to do more of that. We need to have more small communities. We need to learn how to do virtual communities, where, young people are not going to come to the parish church, the parish for, a prayer group or a study group or something like that. But, they might join a Facebook page, they might, Facebook is probably for us old folks now, and they're into something else. But we need to figure out how to merge the technology, how to enter into the culture of young people that, those old folks, they're just so out of touch with. In fact, we're going to have to empower them. We're going to have to say, hey, you want to know about Jesus? Here, this is where you find Jesus in the Gospels. Do you like him? What do you like about him? What don't you like about him? Tell me what you think of this person. And, and what, and a lot of people, a lot of young people find Francis very attractive. The trouble is when they come to church, they don't see Francis in the pulpit. They don't see Francis at the altar. And if they come back and they see the same old that they had before, they're going to make a U-turn and they're never coming back again. So we have to figure out how to get Francis to them, how to get that kind of enthusiasm for justice and for the poor and for inclusivity, that welcoming presence of Francis, that feeling that, you're coming not to a country club with strict rules, but to a warm family, a field hospital, all these other images that Francis uses about the church. I don't know how to do it. If I did it, I wouldn't be writing columns. I'd go out there and do it. But I think we we have to, just as you say, us men have to listen to women, us older folks, we have to listen to the young. And what do you want in a church? What do you want in a community? And then let's make it for them. Let's make them feel welcome. I don't know, I'm rambling on, and I'm way over time. So thank you all very much.
If folks want to stick around, we do have someone who had their hand up for some time. So maybe we'll take one more question. Is that okay with you, Father?
Oh,
Father?
sure.
Okay.
Sure.
We'll take one more question. I also just wanted to note a lot of the issues that were just discussed about sort of trends and sort of people coming to the church. Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, just released a big study around the 2020 census and religion in America. So I posted the link in the chat if folks want to check that out. Thomas, thank you so much for your patience. Thomas Riley has our last question, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Father Reese. I'm a Catholic. I'm against abortion. I support the bishops when they talk about multiple reasons for voting for a candidate and not on one issue. And one of the things that I wrote all those bishops, plus a few extra, plus the nuncio, plus the papal observer at the UN. And I went through scripture looking where Jesus rejects people because of who they are, whether it's a Roman centurion, the apostles who he knew were going to reject him except for John, and said he never rejects anybody. So how can the bishops be rejecting someone for voting for candidates who pro-choice and the other issues? So I put it on. So my point is, by baptism, God's working through all of us. So it's not a matter of democracy in action, but rather to write to all these people, and hopefully that they're at least gonna, if they get a deluge of letters saying, hey, listen, can we look at this whole issue? Can you involve laity? Because here in DC, a lot of visitors, and I'm hearing them after Mass, and I'm saying, hey, well, you got an issue there. What'd your bishop say? What'd your priest? Without exception, they're not talking to them. It's just not there. And I mean, when you've got, 2 priests for 5 parishes spread over 50 miles, or a woman who can't get her paper annulment papers processed justifiably, 1 priest, 4 parishes, he's too busy. Another one's tired, they take him out for a meal, 1 priest, 3 parishes. I'm thinking, how much is this going on? Do we really need to look at it? Is God giving us the priests we need, but not necessarily the ones that the hierarchy wants? There's a big, big gap. And I don't know that the bishops are going around saying, well, to the lay people, where do you feel God is calling us now? What's the direction of the church? Our church, So often when people complain, the church, I say, well, you're saying the church. Are you talking about the bishops? Yeah, the bishops, the church. I'm thinking, hey, we're all church. Anyway, thanks for listening, Father. And your point about the elephants. I was in Zambia. One of the proverbs they have is, when the elephants fight, the grass is crushed. And so, you can think about that with the bishops and the Pope's thing of, hey, can you discuss behind closed door? Thanks for listening. God bless you. Keep up the good work. I support you, and God bless SI. Nation spirituality is ours as well, the missionaries of Africa. God bless. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you very much. I think you said it all very well. Yeah, Jesus was very welcoming. He gave communion to Judas at the Last Supper. This is something that we saw with Jesus. The only people he ever got mad at were the money changers in the temple. That's where he finally lost his cool. And he also was very critical of the scribes and the Pharisees. It was the people with power that he got mad at. He never got mad at the little people. It was people who abused their power. But thank you all very much. You've been so generous and sticking around and listening to me. And it's nice to be back with the St. Ignatius community. And God bless you all. And I guess we're coming back. When is it? August 8th? One of those Sundays for another presentation. So look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you so much, Father Reese. And maybe we can give a virtual sort of round of applause and We very much appreciate you coming and spending some time with us and sharing your views on some of these really important, really timely issues. And, you know, this type of programming is very much in tune with what Father Greg's calls reading the signs of the times. And that's something we as a parish are doing every day, every week. And we'll continue to bring these types of events and lectures to you also. Again, please sign up for the newsletter so you can join us for the next time. And we wish you all a happy Sunday. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.